All right, today we're diving into a really powerful passage from the book of Jeremiah, chapter 12, verses 7 to 17. And let me tell you, this one is a real emotional roller coaster. It takes us from the absolute heartbreak of God's judgment all the way to this totally surprising offer of mercy. It's pretty incredible. So let's just jump right in. And boom, verse 7 hits us right away with the core of the whole thing. The first thing you've got to notice is who's talking. This isn't Jeremiah anymore. It's God himself. And listen to what he says. He calls Judah the dearly beloved of my soul. Wow. I mean, this isn't some distant, cold judge speaking. You can feel the pain in these words. It's the sound of someone having to let go of something they love, giving it over to the consequences of its own actions. So you might be wondering, where did all this come from? Well, it's so important to get this. This judgment didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It wasn't random. It was the end result of a really, really long story. You can see it laid out here. It all started with the covenant, right? Then you had good times, like the reforms under King Josiah. But that was followed by some serious rebellion. So, when Jerusalem finally falls in 586 BC, it's not a surprise. It's actually the tragic fulfillment of warnings that had been given for literally centuries. Okay, so that's the big picture history. But this whole breakdown had a really personal side too, and that's what we're going to dig into next. Let's look at verses 7 through 9 because they use these incredibly powerful images to show us exactly how that relationship between God and his people completely fell apart. So, God kicks things off with this. Honestly, it's a shocking comparison in verse 8. He says, his own people, the ones he calls his heritage, have become like a lion in the forest. But here's the kicker. They're roaring against him. Can you imagine? And we need to be really clear about what this lion image means. This is not the Lion of Judah kind of thing, you know? It's not about nobility or strength. No way. This is a picture of something that's gone horribly wrong. It's unnatural, hostile rebellion. These are the very people who were supposed to be in a special relationship with God. And now they're just aggressively fighting back against any attempt at correction. And this problem really ramped up with the kings who came after the good King Josiah. Then, in verse 9, the imagery completely shifts. It's like a scene change. Judah goes from being this roaring lion to a speckled bird. And what's even crazier is that God himself calls out to the beasts of the field and says, "Come on, come and devour her." You know, this image is just dripping with tragic irony. Think about it. A speckled bird. It's different, right? It stands out. And Judah's special status, their covenant with God, that was supposed to be their blessing. It was supposed to protect them. But now, because of their rebellion, the very thing that made them unique is what makes them a target. It's like a giant bullseye for all the nations around them. So who exactly are these beasts of the field that God is summoning? Well, history gives us a pretty clear answer. The main instrument of this judgment was the booming empire of Babylon. And the man in charge? Nebuchadnezzar II. And if you look at the timeline, it's just wild. He comes to power at the exact moment Judah is in this steep decline. It's no coincidence. So this broken relationship wasn't just some abstract spiritual problem. Oh no, it had devastating, real-world consequences. So for this next part, let's look at verses 10 through 13. This is where we see how that spiritual rebellion leads to the actual physical destruction of the land. Okay, so in verse 10, God doesn't mince words. He points the finger squarely at the leadership. Now, you'll see the word pastors here, but it's not what we think of today. You have to think of it more like shepherds of the nation. We're talking about the kings, the priests, and yeah, the false prophets. And this is a direct shot at leaders like King Jehoiakim. I mean, his job was to take care of God's vineyard, right? But instead, his entire reign was just filled with idolatry and injustice. He completely ignored the warnings from prophets like Jeremiah. He was actively destroying the very thing he was supposed to protect. This goes way beyond just bad politics. It was a total betrayal of that dearly beloved of my soul we heard about right at the start. And this leads us to the double tragedy in verse 11. It's heartbreaking. First, the land itself is described as if it's a person mourning its own destruction. But you know what makes it even worse? The people. They were completely numb to it all. The text says, "No man layeth it to heart." They just didn't care. They were watching their own world collapse and felt nothing. And let's be super clear about who the text says is ultimately behind all this destruction. When the invaders come, it's called the sword of the Lord. So this wasn't just a random political thing, one empire conquering another. The text presents this as divine judgment. And the Babylonian army was the tool being used to carry it out. Man, and the proverb in verse 13 just sums it all up perfectly. It says, the people are out there working hard, they sow wheat. But what do they get? Thorns. It's such a powerful picture of total economic and agricultural failure. Imagine all your work, all your effort, leading to nothing but pain and shame. That's what it was like to live under this judgment. But hold on, the story doesn't actually end with Judah's destruction. Just when you think you've heard the worst of it, verse 14 comes along. And let's just say the circle of accountability is about to get a whole lot bigger. We're about to talk about the neighbors. Right, so in verse 14, God completely shifts his focus to the nations all around Judah. And these aren't just random countries. These are the ones who are watching Judah get weaker and weaker, and instead of helping, they saw it as their big chance to profit. Yeah, we're talking about places like Edom, Moab, and Ammon. They weren't just innocent bystanders watching from the sidelines. No, they jumped right in. They actively helped plunder what God calls my inheritance. And God is making it crystal clear. I saw what you did. Their opportunism didn't go unnoticed, and now they're going to face judgment too. Okay, so at this point, everything seems bleak, right? Judgment seems absolute, final. And then the whole passage does a 180, a turn that absolutely no one would have seen coming. We go from this relentless, devastating judgment to a jaw-dropping offer of grace. Verse 15 is it's a stunning reversal. God says, after that I have plucked them out, and you're expecting something terrible to follow, but instead he says, I will return and have compassion on them. This is huge. It shows us that the judgment was never meant to be the end of the story. It was a painful tool, for sure, but it was a tool of discipline, and it was always meant to lead to this exact moment, a moment of restoration. And this wasn't just some vague, maybe one day kind of hope. This actually happened. History tells us exactly how it was fulfilled. After decades of exile, Babylon, the big bad empire, it falls to Persia. And then in 539 BC, the new king, Cyrus the Great, he issues a decree that allows the Jewish exiles to go home. Just like that, prophecy becomes history. It's amazing. But wait, it gets even more wild. In verse 16, this offer of mercy gets extended to the very same nations that were just condemned, the ones who plundered Judah. But there's a condition, and it's a complete flip of the script. Remember how they taught Israel to worship their false gods? Well, now they have to learn to swear allegiance to the Lord. And if they do that, they can be built in the midst of God's people. I mean, this is an absolutely mind-blowing concept for that time, this idea of including non-Jewish people. But the passage doesn't end on just a warm, fuzzy note. It ends with a very clear, very final choice. Verse 17 lays it all out. The offer of mercy is 100% real, but it's not unconditional. It requires a response. It requires obedience. And this just reaffirms God's total authority, right? He is the Lord over all nations, and he has the power both to build them up and to tear them down. And that's really what this whole passage leaves us with, isn't it? It's this powerful central question. As we watch empires rise and fall, as we see this incredible story unfold, Jeremiah forces us to wrestle with this complex dance between God's judgment and his mercy. And it makes us ask, who really holds the final word?